So, hello, I'm Paul. I am the education lead for the Ministry of Eco Education, and we're the charity supporting teachers to weave sustainability through their teaching. Welcome to what is now the last in our summer series of online panel discussions exploring some of the big questions in education. Now, at the Ministry of Eco Education, we bring together the resources and opportunities and inspiration from hundreds of organisations, international curriculum aligned learning journeys framed by big questions. And some of the questions that link to today's discussion are things like, is the weather changing? Is nature the answer? Should we walk more? So today is also pertinent because the UK is experiencing some extreme heat, and we were just commenting at the moment. I think I've got a thermometer here that says it's 30 degrees in my office. And the extreme heat is placing stress on sporting events, including the hundreds of sports days that have been maybe cancelled or rescheduled, or just simply sort of the structure of them changed. So today we're going to be exploring the big question: how can PE teachers engage with sustainability? And we're joined by two wonderful panelists, of Vicky and Ali. We're going to start in a moment with the panelists sharing their response to the question, and then we're going to open up the discussion with questions just between everyone. Now, to give you some context, schools typically break down their physical education, or PE, and sports provision into maybe three key or core categories. We've got PE, which is then the structured curriculum element. We've got school sport, which might be things like extracurricular and competitions, or clubs and competitions. And we've also then got physical activity in a really more general sense about the general movement and active travel. And then schools generally allocate at least maybe 2 hours of curriculum time per week for these activities. And I've got just a quote from the Youth Sport Trust's PE and School Sport annual report, which stated that physical activity levels have stagnated globally, as well as across the UK. And in England, about 2.2 million children are now doing less than 30 minutes of activity a day. Now, that is a rise compared with pre-pandemic levels, and only about 48% are meeting what the UK's chief medical officer recommends of at least 60 minutes of physical activity a day. And then we can go into more detail and think actually it's girls and children with special educational needs and disabilities and those from disadvantaged backgrounds who continue to face the greatest barriers to being active. What's also interesting from this report was that there were key findings showing that 1 in 10 children in the UK are obese or at risk of obesity, that physical activity levels have stagnated now for the fifth year running, but 1 in 10 young people in the UK have low well-being, with 70% of parents believing that's a result of inactivity, often that might be put down to things like digital distraction. Children are overall spending less time being active. We've had nearly 1 in 5 students with PE lessons cancelled this academic year, and poor physical development is also impacting school readiness, with teachers reporting that 1 in 3 children were actually not ready for school at all. So um, there's sort of deep concern. But what we do also know is that 93% of young people believe PE is important, and 71% of young people want to be more active at school. And we do have 96% of teachers that agree that sport and play benefit a really key role in young people's well-being. I've got a couple of other reports I wanted to mention. I've got Sport England that mentioned that they believe that nothing has the potential to suppress physical activity, along with the health and happiness benefits it brings, more than climate change. So Sport England recognise this, and that could be through disrupting major events or thwarting maybe mass participation. And it will be those least active and most deprived who will suffer the most. So again, recognising the inequality within this. Sport England also recognised that participation levels are being affected by the increasing prevalence of things like extreme weather events such as heat waves and flooding. And like the rest of society, the sport and physical activity sector is actually contributing to climate change. And it recognises things like the energy consumption in facilities and travel to participation, which often are some of the things that create the greatest impact. So mass sporting events have a significant climate impact, and that could be from energy waste or transport. Now, I wanted to mention just Forest Green Rovers. who the greenest football club in the world's first plant-based football club, and they're maybe a beacon for a lot of good practice in this. And they are owned by Dale Vince, who's the founder of the work that we do at the Ministry of Eco Education. And now we've been really fortunate to host some live lessons from Forest Green Rovers to explore this, and we've done things also like interviewing Reflow, who is a sustainability activewear brand who provide the kit for Forest Green Rovers, but they also do things like Formula E, golf, and lots of other sports. Now, the other context to give to all of this is that there is a wealth of grassroots organisations campaigning for climate action in sport, and this is across all sports. So we're fortunate today to be joined by Ali from Pledgeball, but there's also organisations like Sport Positive, Football for Future, Champions for Earth. We've got Green Runners, actually. That's another one that I'm involved with. And there's so many more. Now, Sport England estimates that about 120,000 football matches are lost annually due to weather, and a third of community pitches are unplayable for about 2 or even 3 months of the year. Now, with the World Cup going on at the moment, we've had 9 of the group stage games that were played in severe heat. And the World Cup has had to make these special changes. We've this year had these addition of 3-minute hydration breaks each half. So what about PE teachers, and how can school sport engage with sustainability? How can schools better adapt to the impacts of climate change? So to help us answer these questions, I'd like to first introduce Vicky Randall. And Vicky is a teacher educator, researcher, and consultant in physical education, and she has over 2 decades of experience in the field. And what's really interesting is Vicky's at the moment supporting UCL's Climate and Sustainability Education Centre to create the Teaching for Sustainable Futures module for PE. So, yeah, I'll hand over to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Paul. Wow, that was quite a lot of context setting, wasn't there? And I'm really pleased actually in the setting of the discussion today. You've highlighted aspects that we could have drawn completely down a sport avenue here, but actually some of the issues you're raising in those statistics and those reports that have come out recently impact much beyond just sort of sport participation. You've touched upon health, for example, and the implications on not just physical health but mental health, and also children's just broader development, the impact on young people not engaging in activity related to potentially issues and impacts of environment on their physical development, which is huge, and let alone going down the road of sort of social opportunities and experiences in the digital age for being out and about in the outdoors and being active with young people. So I think you've done a massive shift in making my job a little bit easier here in pitching from a position of this issue and discussing this issue. To start with, sort of 2 critical areas that are really bringing these discussions together for physical education curriculum at the moment. One you have touched upon in actually globally across physical education, we're starting to think more broadly about sustainable futures and climate change education. And there's been a number of really positive seminars looking at this around how educational curricula across the world is shaping and remodeling what their physical education provision is. We can look to places like Scandinavia and Nordic countries, which have a whole concept of building, which is around a curriculum that is connected to being in the outdoors. So it's their model, for example, looks beyond just a moral one around planetary health and saving the planet to one which is an ethical one, that nature is not just a resource for us to use, it's a resource that should be protected in its own right. And how can we address that in PE curricula? So there's some work going on around how we completely reshape. And this comes at a time for us in England where we're rethinking and redesigning our curriculum in line for a review of the curriculum for 2028, and conversations around sustainability and climate education have of course been part of those conversations, and how in England and across the UK, where other curriculum reform is happening, we can make sure that what we do in physical education obviously addresses some of these big areas and questions. So yeah, you've set the scene brilliantly. This is a global discussion for physical education at the moment in schools, but also very close to our heart in education as we go through areas of curriculum reform. And just a thanks also for highlighting that there's physical education as a curriculum time. There's the world of school sport that sits beyond the curriculum, that schools are a huge part of, a really important piece for young children in their journey to be active and develop those skills, but also just the day-to-day physical activity and how that impacts upon sort of approaches. So I had sort of three areas, if that's right. Okay, I wanted to sort of share to add to your initial opener, Paul, if that's okay, which has linked to the areas I've been addressing for the UCL's Teaching for Sustainable Futures module. And I think these are areas which we could look at this as such a massive topic. And how do we even begin as a teacher in school to address this through my day-to-day teaching? But actually looking at some of the different lenses of PE curricula, I think there's some really simple and obvious day-to-day things that we can start really questioning about and thinking and tweaking within our practice. So the first area is around the connection between two major areas that we're at an intersection with, and that is our physical health. And you've quoted some statistics there around obesity, activity levels, and mental health. And only last week, I think there was a commissioner's report that said 1 in 6 children are now on mental health intervention programs. And we know physical activity is a protective factor around, helpful and positive mental health. So where we're at a sort of crisis around our health and our young people's health, and also the health of the planet. So the first area really is to look at where those two come together and intersect. So what things can we do in our schools, in our curriculum, which promotes the health of us, as human beings, and that greater connectivity, connection and meaning to the health of the planet. And that might be, again, a big, broad area to discuss, but, conversations with colleagues and schools and just starting to unpick practices globally, there's some really wonderful things going on across the world and across our country and our borders, where things like simply looking at areas like the nature and the environment, how we walk, how we hike, how we use those natural spaces, where physical education takes place, the resources that we use to be active, how we can develop our physical skills, our stamina, our strength, our endurance, to be less reliant on modes of transport that might be contributing to planetary poor health. But even just simply as a connectivity to the environment. So how we can, in our walk to the local swimming pool for our PE lessons, recognise that in itself has a value and meaning as part of the lesson, not just the bit in the pool where I'm learning how to swim. And broader than that, activities, is a wonderful activity that I think I shared with you before, Paul, called plogging, which is a Scandinavian concept where you litter, pick and run. So instead of just going on a run, to complete competitive targets of distance and time, the purpose is actually to connect with the environment, to clean the environment or the spaces, whether that be a school field or a local community park. So there are little tweaks that we can do to start making our young people connect in. The second area is how physical activity can be used. I think if you're thinking about this from a curriculum perspective or a whole school's perspective, around how broad physical activity can be used just for the promotion of awareness around climate change in education. And there's some amazing people doing some amazing things out there. Ross Edgley just did that swim around Iceland to help support the geology and the environmental impact on in climate change on that part of the world, and the melting ice caps, and how rising levels and changing in water temperatures are affecting that through his swim, and through that they collected samples of the water. We've also got people who have done, Rosie Watson's done this wonderful journey from her home in England all the way through Europe to collect stories around how people are being more sustainable. And she's done it just running with a backpack and traveling on foot to actually capture stories of climate change education. These are really inspiring contemporary adventure explorers who are doing some really wonderful work around using physical activity to promote environmental awareness. And I think there's another piece around curriculum which sits beyond inspiration or sits beyond the kind of obvious health benefits, and that's the skills that young people need that they can develop quite directly through a PE and school sport and physical activity curriculum. Things like teamwork, leadership, problem solving, communication. These are skills that young people are going to need for difficult questions and advocating change and cooperation and all the things that we know young people are going to have to grapple with in the future to make a standout change around change. And young people are really doing that brilliantly and having that voice and agency in schools where they're saying, let's look at how we what places we buy our equipment from in PE. Let's look at how many fixtures we do a year. Let's look at if there are other ways that we can be more sustainable with our water bottles when we need an extra drink in PE lessons or in our sport lessons. So they're starting to develop those skills directly, but also indirectly through the curriculum and through teaching, which it develops these universal skills that young people will require. So I think there are many avenues we can go down in sort of summary for where PE sport and physical activity can sit with this. Health is absolutely one. Activities that we choose and highlight and that collect that meaning is also really, really important. How we use people doing amazing things in the name of physical activity and sport to inspire young people to take on these challenges and look at how their health and planetary health can be connected to the future health of the planet, and also developing those skills for a future where young people are proactive, not apathetic, are making choices, making tough decisions, and have those skills and abilities to negotiate, cooperate, and work together to solve some of these really, really big problems. So there are just some initial quite big thoughts from me, Paul, but I think they are ones that we have to start talking about and grappling with as simply from a curriculum point all the way through the school.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky. I think that's really interesting where you bring up this idea of time in nature and that physical activity is a way to build relationships and connections with the rest of nature. And that maybe this is something we can explore later on, but that sense of maybe challenging some of the stereotypes of what is sport and people have got these attitudes that it has to be some sort of competitive or team sport and there's very fixed ideas, and actually could we broaden that idea out, and it's great that you're mentioning people like Ross and some of these people who are doing really inspiring physical kind of quite extreme deeds to sort of and then that then brings in this element of storytelling as well, I think, and that's something maybe that's powerful that we could talk about in a minute. What I'd like to do now then is introduce Ali Woodward. I'm just going to add you. So, Ali, sorry, you are from Pledgeball, which is a research-driven charity that works with sport fans and football clubs and all kinds of sports activities and teams to tackle climate change, particularly through mobilising communities to make pledges and take action. And what's kind of really exciting is Pledgeball actually won the Grassroots Organisation of the Year award at the 2024 BBC Green Sports Awards, and there's lots and lots of exciting campaigns and initiatives you've been involved with. So, Ali, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you both, actually. Some really interesting points have been raised here, especially ones that get me really excited for the work that we do at Pledgeball. But before I kind of dive into them and add some more fuel to the fire, I'll just give a short introduction into who I am. So, as Paul said, I'm Ali Woodward, head of commercial at Pledgeball, the UK's leading sports and sustainability charity. We're on a mission essentially to mobilise over 1.2 million sports fans around climate action And we do this by bringing a much more joyful, playful, exciting, happy kind of energy to the conversation as opposed to hard, concrete carbon metrics and facts and insights. And this is exactly the kind of ethos that we want to encourage schools to adopt, because at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. And if you look at it just through that angle, it might kind of put you off actually bringing this conversation to the students and to the school itself. So that being said, I actually think that there is a hidden superpower within schools. They are a primary point of contact with the next generation, with all these young minds who are curious and discovering the world and learning new things. Schools have direct access to that, and we should be using it to influence the right kind of change that we want to see in society and take on these big complex problems and actually simplify them and make them something engaging and inspiring for the next generation. And I think sometimes when people think about climate change and sustainability, and we think about it in the context of a school, you might assume that that topic is only best placed for a lab or for the science team, maybe a geography classroom. But actually, I think there's a huge secret weapon behind the PE teams getting involved in this. And we'll talk to some of those points as to why in a second. But I think we've been missing this in this fight for change and in the ability to protect where we play. But coming on to kind of what we do and why we're best placed to kind of speak to this is Pledgeball is a sports sustainability charity doing incredible work. And we're backed by academic researchers. And our main goal is to engage people in these conversations and shift public attitudes towards climate by action and mobilizing the sports community. The way that we do this is through a flagship mechanism called the Pledgeball League, and that essentially turns sustainability into a competitive team sport. So fans, players might make a small pro-environmental pledge, such as switching to a reusable water bottle or committing to active travel, and then those pledges accumulate into points that drive their favorite club up the real world leaderboard. And so this is a prime example of when you harness collective passion of sport, small individuals can take actions that add up to massive change. And so when we think about it from the question today, such as how can PE teachers engage with sustainability, our answer at Pledgeball is that PE teachers aren't just capable of engaging with it, they are a secret weapon in harnessing this already existing passion, excitement, enthusiasm that sits within the sports space and leveraging that. So in terms of then why are PE teachers the secret weapon and why have I used that? For me, let's go back to I guess a key point surrounding the national curriculum for physical education. It has an explicit goal, which is to inspire pupils, build character, and crucially, establish lifelong healthy, active habits. And when we think about the word habits, we know that PE is something that really does encourage this, whether it be tidying up after yourself once the game's finished, whether it be checking on teammates, maybe it's around packing up once you've finished. But all these small little habits that you build in sport can actually be applied to this conversation of making more sustainable behavior change. And so essentially, the reason why I think PE teachers have kind of such a unique structural advantage can be broken down into kind of three core pillars. One of them is they act as a really trusted messenger at the school. So they have a relationship such as a coach-athlete type dynamic with the pupils, and that bond between a pupil and a PE teacher or coach is built on mutual respect, teamwork, and trust. And I think teachers' voices carry a completely different kind of weight than the standard classroom lecture, and we should be using that and leveraging that to a really positive advantage here. PE also exists outside in outdoor space, so it happens outside in the elements. Vicky, I really liked your example of when you walk to the swimming pool for that swimming lesson. How can we take the experience of the walk and extract the value of that? And it's true. I think a lot of sports today exist outside. We know that. And that creates the climate change that we're experiencing to become something very tangible for pupils. For example, when a pitch is waterlogged or frozen or too hot to play on, pupils and the teachers will feel that firsthand. And that's a really great example there, an opportunity to stimulate conversations and have that conversations with students because they are the first ones experiencing it. And then there's another area which is this idea of the power of social norming. So essentially, when a PE teacher steps into this space and becomes an advocate for sustainability or a champion for sustainability, we can call this essentially an unexpected advocate. And this completely breaks down this stereotype that caring about the planet is for a specific person. So going back again to the assumption that sustainability and climate change is just a conversation for science, actually it breaks that mold and it signals to every single pupil or child on that field that taking care of the environment is actually just a core part of being a good teammate or a disciplined sportsman. And we can take all the values of sportsmanship into this topic itself. In terms of experience that Pledgeball have had and where we have been able to kind of engage cohorts of students or football fans, we've worked with quite a lot of industry leaders on it. So we've seen this in real time play out where having advocates or public facing voices deliver this type of message does stimulate that specific change. So we did a project with the Lawn and Tennis Association. We've essentially done a Pledgeball League with them for 4 seasons in a row now. And what we found is that when coaches that are working on particular tennis courts adopt the Pledgeball message and are advocates for the topic in real time and are speaking to their pupils about it, we see a much larger kind of shift in engagement and a shift in conversation. And so for us, the evidence is there essentially, where if you allow respected and trusted voices to deliver a particular message, then you can have the kind of the change in the conversations that we need to see. So I think there are a lot of areas where PE and PE teachers specifically can drive this change. And I think it all starts with being comfortable in, I think, leaning into the joy of the sport and then leading on those conversations too.
Well, thank you so much. Um, something that's really stood out for me on that is this idea of well, you talked about secret weapon and the idea that like PE teachers have got this direct access to communities, but that they're a trusted messenger and that they can be this unexpected advocate. I think that messaging list that is a really powerful. To me, it feels like I know that the Association for PE Teachers had its annual conference a few weeks ago, but it's the sort of thing that needs to be spoken at those sorts of events, and we can really mobilise PE teachers as this like you described as a sort of secret weapon in this force. Um, I'm going to bring both of you back into the conversation and got a few sort of themes and questions I wanted to sort of bring up. I mean, one of them, Ali, just off the back of you were mentioning there, are there any really great examples of particular sports or sports people who act as that role model, who are maybe an example and make a point of really kind of engaging with climate change?
Yeah, so from Pledgeball's side, we actually have a pillar called the Pledgeball Ambassador Program. And this is kind of like an open call branch of the charity that encourages any fan-facing kind of voice or personality, whether that be an ex-Olympian or a local athlete from a community level, or maybe they're like a global athlete, to come on board and be an advocate for the message that Pledgeball is trying to deliver. And we found that actually when a voice that is already integrated into a specific community leans into this and speaks to the message and delivers it in their own words, in their own style, through their own content or creation lens, it travels a lot further because that relationship's already been formed between the person and the end user who's listening. So we've found that actually, when it comes to Pledgeball delivering an important message, we tend to use voices that are already integrated into the community to do that for us. Because at the end of the day, as powerful as the message can be, it's also who delivers it. And if that trust is already built, if you're already receptive to certain messages from a particular person, it is a lot easier to kind of build that relationship and investigate a new topic with them. So I think there's a lot of power behind having kind of local community advocates or global community advocates, whatever it might be, to speak to this really.
Do you know who are some of the ambassadors?
Yes, so we have a chef. So there's a chef called Lagom Chef,
Mhm.
and we actually did a podcast episode with him where we talked about the amount of kind of food waste that goes on in everyday kitchens across the UK. And with him, we do kind of different kind of content creation or campaign work where we explore the joy and the love that he has for food and cooking, but pairs it with a lens of like, well, how can we kind of improve what the issues are in this sector? We had a pro footballer called Alexi Rojas. So he was a pro goalkeeper for Arsenal, coming up through the academy. And he is incredibly passionate about this topic and wants to speak to it as much as he can. And so we actually sent him round a kind of recycle power plant, like a waste management power plant.
Mm.
And he had never been to one before. I'd never seen how one works before. And so he went on this kind of journey of discovery, and learned so much about it, and then put that out to his social channels. And then you can actually see that that stimulates conversations amongst his fans and his football fans, because again, you're exposing them to something they might necessarily not always have thought about. But once you put it in front of them through that trusted voice and message, it stimulates that curiosity. So yeah, that was a good one. And then, not to name drop, but we did do like an activation with Gareth Bale. Although he didn't convert onto a full-time Pledgeball ambassador, we did a Champions League campaign with Gareth Bale, and he spoke to kind of small changes that he would make in his everyday life, such as changing to an alternative plant-based milk. And he spoke to this idea of small collective change altogether drives the most impact. And we saw great results from that, particularly from like the sports sector, the football community as well.
I was going to say, Vicky, we've talked about this as well. Some of the voices, or you talk about Ross Edgley, but there are people in that space as well who are coming at it from a I was trying, what's the language of how you describe what they're doing? It's kind of endurance, isn't it? Big endurance events. But those people are often quite strong advocates because they spend so much time immersed in the natural environment. Vicky.
Yeah, I think you're right. And talking on this theme of superpowers, you couldn't help but get me thinking, Annie, that like like these kind of big sports ambassadors, or just these just regular people doing amazing things, who create their own sort of social media presence through this advocacy work. um there's a superpower within physical education, if we're kind of looking at that as well, and that is that as a subject it's physical, isn't it? It's the subject where you're doing the thing in the environment and in the space, and in the inclement weather or the extreme weather conditions. So you're not only thinking about sustainability, climate change, and that awareness, you're experiencing it, you're feeling it, it's sensory, and you're kind of connecting really strongly to it. And I think that's what I love about some of these adventurists who are doing that. You feel it, don't you, completely when they share that story, in the ice waters, or in the extreme heat. I mean, I I'm a massive fan of the tour, and I know that has whole load of sports level carbon emission aspects and challenges around it. But from a human level, you're looking at the simplicity of a human on a bike, and what they're experiencing in these ultra endurance, these extreme weather that we're facing, and they must be feeling something, that that human side of this. So yeah, I think you're right, Paul. I think the human story and these adventurous and the people who are using their bravery, their courage, their strength, their determination to share that experience to quite extreme levels is quite overwhelming and inspiring. And to some degree, we can prompt that, like you say, like Ali, those small changes through physical education, school sport, or wider physical activity. Young people can go and experience this and feel it and connect to it. Maybe not to those extreme levels. Maybe one day they'll want to, but I think it's quite a superpower in the subjects level, as well as potentially what some of these amazing people are doing to use their profile to raise these conversations as well.
What about the Vicky then? Maybe something to draw out of that. You slightly mentioned, but the stereotype of a school site is mown grass and tarmac.
Yeah.
And what responsibility do PE
Mm.
departments have in trying to help increase the biodiversity and to think about how the school sites, we've got these national initiatives around the National Education Nature Park, and there is momentum to try and renature, rewild school sites. But how does that sit with PE? And I guess also, Ali, maybe in a moment, maybe there are some examples from the wider sports world where it is happening. I don't know. Vicky, did you want to start? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one because we're caught between a little bit of a rock and a hard place, aren't we? That in some ways we want to encourage young people to be more active and to have more active and to be part of a greater active part of their day and those habit forming ideas that Annie mentioned about. But on the other hand, that is having a direct impact on the environment and the lands and spaces and the places where we are active. And as I mentioned in that introductory brief, this is more than just about protecting nature so we can do what we want to it. there's an ethical question here around to what extent is this about our health and to what extent is this about preserving something that's really important. I mean, I've had really great conversations, Paul, with schools where we've looked at the landscape and gone, well, why isn't gardening and looking after the environment part of physical activity, part of our conversation? It's a physical skill. We use lots of functional movements. It has an impact on the environment, but maybe that's a challenge for us in our mindset of understanding what physical education is first. And if we're so wedded to this idea that physical education can only be competitive sports or team games or things where we have to go back to that same patch of grass and put our football boots on or use equipment over and over again, and there's a sustainability issue there. Why can't we go to a local park, change the environment, or actually just spend some time valuing the environment in a physical way? Can't that be sufficient? But I think that takes a whole cultural shift in locating the space. Other than that, I'm torn. My real love is watching the park runs. Being part of Park Run, say, is a global phenomenon which has got unprecedented levels of people out every Saturday in a social, without any shadow. The health implications on people have been huge for that. But it also tears up the parks. And I know Park Run have been really, really involved in discussion with local parks and communities around how we manage this balance between health promotion and activity in nature, and how we don't just use it for our benefit and good, and how we give back. So I don't have an obvious simple answer there, I don't think, but I think the conversation is helpful, the recognition of it is helpful, and I think shifting what we understand physical education could be, even to a small degree, could be a positive
It
step.
gets me thinking of like the good gym movement,
yes,
and the idea of
yeah.
linking doing some social good with a physical activity. There's maybe elements of that could be drawn into schools. Sorry, Ali, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, Vicky, because I think we exist in a culture where we are able to enjoy things, for example, the park run repeatedly every weekend, or it might be going to a football match and attending like a big stadium. And these are all things that we feel like are given to our experience on the planet. Actually, there's no connection to the responsibility that we also should have for enjoying those things. It's almost like we expect to be able to do what we want, however we want, but we are not responsible for the consequences of that action. And by that, I mean, okay, if you want to go to a park run every weekend, part and parcel of that should be, well, then you're also responsible for taking care of that space that you go and enjoy, because you are, you're the one that's leaning into it, benefiting from it. You should also be taught to take care of it. And the same is true, because I've been thinking about this recently, which is when you go to a football match, the amount of rubbish and mess that is created out on the streets. It's not even a football match. London Marathon, for example, huge, enormous amounts of mess. We all go, we all enjoy it, and then we go home. And it's not our responsibility to take care of the mess that we've created. And I think there's a disconnect that we just expect everything to be solved behind the scenes and magically change. And that's just not true. There are people out there that will go and clear up that rubbish. There are people out there that will tend to the grass. But maybe culturally, we need to have it so that if you're part of the enjoyment, you're also part of the solution for anything that comes off the back of it. And so if we apply that to kind of schools and in the concept of kind of circular PE or PE pro eco habits, I think there are things that we could potentially start to embed as a responsibility to those students, which is if we're going out and we're playing rounders every week in summer and we see the grass is drying up and we're slowly ruining it, then we should also be part of the solution for that, such as maybe we could do a biodiversity workshop and seed planting or whatever it might be. And I think we look at things very one-dimensionally when it can be very multifaceted, and actually that should be exciting and that should be something that energizes us, which is okay, we have this amazing thing called sport. How far can we take sport? How can we push the boundaries of what sport can mean to us as individuals? And so from a Pledgeball perspective, we know that from the behavioral data that like essentially if you get someone to commit to something really small over like a small change that builds into a micro habit over time, it will trigger something called like an identity shift. And the way in which you take up space and the way in which you value things and the way in which you care about things does start shifting. And that's what we consider to be a measurement of like systemic change over time. And so maybe we could take PE and think, okay, what's something, maybe you're not going to have the big stories that we just discussed, such as like swimming the ocean or whatever it might be. You exist in a school, that's fine. It doesn't have to be like newsworthy, but it could be small, simple, tangible changes that can be implemented right away in your department that can create a new culture within the school where children are responsible for the environment that they play in. And so examples, just to throw some out there, could be you could teach a habit of bringing in a reusable water bottle. Like that's a very easy place to start, right? And if you as the teacher do that week on, week out, and nod to it, you're becoming an advocate, you're becoming a trusted messenger, you're changing the culture of this is what we do and how we do it. And that can shift things over time. And then alongside that, it could be implementing like a mandatory quick 2 minute pitch sweep after playing. Even if there's not even that much like rubbish or debris, it's just getting into that culture of like, well, we've enjoyed this space, so we're responsible for it now and we're going to clear it up. And I think that's something that we need to look at a little bit more. There's another side of things as well, just pulling in, you mentioned, asked Paul, like what's going on in industry and who we're working with. So Pledgeball have just had a huge funding project come through where we're working with some pro clubs and essentially looking at turning their football stadiums into community hubs. And part of turning them into community hubs is, okay, if they're used for match day on a Saturday, what's the building being used for 6 out of 7 days of the week past that? And we're looking at things such as having kind of like a repair hub or a repair cafe where football fans and fans of that club can come in and bring maybe their bike or maybe a shirt that needs repairing. And you know that you can go to your club and you can have that as a resource. Could we apply this to schools? Which is, okay, could we have repair hubs at a school? So once a month, all kids that might have, uniform sports kit that might have a hole in, but it's still usable, come together and we do a sewing workshop and we teach them how to repair it themselves. And so we're not just teaching them and speaking to them and guiding them, but we're giving them the skills for the change that's also necessary. So I think there's so many things from industry we can take and scale down and apply to schools. I think it's just really important to be creative and to be as expansive as you can and get excited by it.
Paul, you've just triggered something for me. Just the small things, if I may. Many children of a very young age in primary schools wear white polos and t-shirts for their school day or for their PE kit. And I'm often wondering about this now. Factor 50, factor 30 sun cream. I cannot imagine how many t-shirts have been stained or don't look right for a uniform. I mean, I've got piles of them just in the drawer at home for my little one who is, has to wear a white t-shirt, but every time we put sun cream on in the morning, it stains, and that t-shirt is no longer looking like a smart part of a uniform. So it might even just be how schools can review their physical education PE policy. We've had a number of reform policy nudges around that in the children's wellbeing bill that's come through, where the number of logoed items need to be minimised by school for cost effectiveness. But there is also a factor around what is effective for a young person taking part in physical activity and where they have to wear sun hats, sun cream. How can we preserve? Because I was all ready to hand his kit down to another child coming through, but it's complete, no parent's going to want to touch that kit now. So I think there's so many little small nudges that you're right, is that goes beyond our lane of, say, what we think content of a curriculum area is, and start to look broader. And just to endorse the other point you said, I was talking to some year 10 students from a school in Surrey about this very topic a few weeks ago, and the pitch sweep was one of their go-to things that they said, look, quite simply, if it looks like at the end of a lesson we should just get into the habit as we're tidying up to clear up and after the lesson, and secondly, if we're always doing warm-ups in the same place or cool downs in the same place where we're playing on the pitch later, maybe we take that to a different place in the school grounds because we're noticing that's damaging that part of that environment. So it was really encouraging to hear the young people have these just really empowering but very small ideas about how they could take that responsibility, like you said. So they're just two extra ones for me going, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ali, you were mentioning there around clubs being hubs. I mean, I know then most sports clubs of all different sports will have some sort of community outreach, some element of community engagement, and that might be people from their team who are going into schools, or it might be that they liaise more broadly with the community. But just a chance from both of you, what kinds of networks of support are there for PE teachers, particularly maybe around this sustainability, but that broader kind of community element?
I can jump in here because we're actually coming to quite a big policy change in this, Paul, over the next academic year. So colleagues listening to this at the time of the recording may have been aware that from September 26, there's a new government proposal for something called an enrichment enhancement framework, where all schools will be required to ensure that extracurricular provision for things like dance and community hubs, cultural hubs, physical activity and sport, outdoor adventurous education, civic responsibility and volunteering. There's 5 categories that schools will be required for children to be statutory. It's like a statutory entitlement for all children to access this. So that runs alongside the provision of a new sports partnership network that will be coming into play from January 2027 onwards, where there will be greater connectivity in local areas for schools to connect with sports clubs, community hubs, the arts, to ensure that there is greater reach, and that's going to be a centralised national rollout. So there's lots of opportunity and investment going into this. That will have a knock-on effect, I'm sure, to more children taking part, we hope, in school sport and physical activity, but that's going to obviously then increase resource and capacity and space where these things are happening. So the first is, I'd say, in that enrichment framework, schools have a real opportunity to not only look at those categories of where sport, physical activity and sustainability can happen, but that category also of civic responsibility and volunteering is coming in here as well. So we can look beyond the doing part of the activity and the more social and local responsibility that with those skills that can be developed as standard. And then with the partnership network, there will be a whole infrastructure and network coming out to schools in the next academic year of where they can connect into local hubs, local communities, to strengthen those school community relationships and where those opportunities and experience might exist.
Is this so, Vicky? Just to clarify, sorry, is that the sports premium funding is changing? Is that the case?
It's ceasing from next year,
and it's going to be called Partnerships for All or something.
Sport Partnership Network.
A network, okay.
There'll be a national sports partnership network, and that's in addition to the government's enrichment framework, which will start in September. So this will all coincide with a new national curriculum as well. So there's a sort of momentum of opportunity coming forward, and an opportunity for us advocating for climate and sustainability education to look at these issues and develop these skills in young people and these opportunities to make these connections. It feels a bit like a moment in time for physical education, one of those moments that come every sort of generational periods, and I think we're about to enter one now.
Sorry, Ali, did you want to come in on that as well?
No, I was just saying it sounds really exciting how much is moving and changing, and the fact that you said like it feels like a pivotal moment. I'm really interested to see how it plays out. I think the irony of the question that you asked, which is, where can these schools find the resources? I think that's just something that we need to make very easy and seamless, right? Which is there are all these changes that you've just described, Vicky, but how do we make sure that the right people know about it and that they're well equipped to explain it and they have a journey that they can follow? And also, I think just building out internal champions on a very like granular school level, right? Like you need the teachers that buy into this, and it might not be the PE teacher straight away, but over time, hopefully, we can have that kind of canon effect of advocacy, and so everyone will then know where to go rather than seeking out where to go. We have it on our side where Pledgeball has so many different resources, right, that are available and accessible to anybody. But if people don't know about it or people aren't interested in it, it just kind of sits there. So I think it's just, yeah, building out the right kind of strategy to make sure these things are picked up and rolled out in a way where they're picked up.
So I've got a couple of like flippant questions, and maybe we can quick fire response. So do we, this maybe Vicky in particular, do we need to change the timing of when sports days happen? Are they now happening at a time of year that's always going to have extreme heat, and do we just need to change the time of year?
Possibly yes, and possibly if it is sports day, then do we just mean athletics and certain activities, or do we generally mean embracing sports in its all multitude of ways? In which case, why does that have to be the summer if we embrace the concept of sport more broadly, and then have creativity and opportunities of what that could look like? Then yes, the time of year may be less relevant. That will be a controversial response to the traditionalists out there, I'm sure, but I think so. I think that could be done, and I think there's opportunities for schools to create whatever they want to create in the name of that.
Yeah. So you've come back with the question of what is sports day? What's it for?
I have, sorry, answered a question with a question.
My next one is then, so we've referenced earlier this idea of more time in nature, and I think so many other subjects are confined to the classroom, and what we need to do is shift them into outdoor spaces and normalize time, with the rest of nature. Is it that PE teachers actually are some of the best equipped to be able to manage groups of young people outside a classroom? Could we all learn far more from PE teachers and their ability to manage the behavior of young people and to organize, activities outside?
Yeah, I mean, completely biased, of course, but that's sort of not placing the value of how other teachers are really creative in the classroom and using those spaces. But sure, I mean, physical education teachers uniquely don't have a classroom in terms of the practical teaching of the curriculum, and therefore our classroom is the field, the woodlands, the swimming pool, the playground, where the gym, wherever we are, we're having to adapt to space and change and environment. Where we stand, where's the sun, where's the wind, where's the road? Adapting to environmental conditions becomes part and parcel of the job of teaching. And where I can see young people, are they keeping safe? Do they know what being safe in these environments mean and how that changes from one lesson to the other? So the dynamics and the environment dynamics are huge in physical education, and therefore there's so much there we can offer around discussions around let's bring children out more into those spaces. Interestingly, I had a question that came up years and years ago when I was working in initial teacher education, where there was the school had the rule that teachers couldn't teach physical education as part of their placement. That's not a thing, by the way. They absolutely are encouraged to teach physical education as part of their placement, but they said that's down to the teacher a long time taking the class register. And one of my students came back to me and said, that makes no sense to me, Vicky, because when I'm teaching maths, why wouldn't I then take maths out into the playground and we do it in an active way? Where's the line between what physical education is and what's then teaching learning in a very different and physical space? And I just went, and exactly why that rule is not a rule, because as teachers we should be encouraging different environments and spaces for learning. Absolutely.
So I do just want to finish then on something far more serious and worth far greater discussion. So obviously this the issue of inequality, both in terms of access to and engagement in sports. And so just something else that I picked up on is that grassroots and women's sports are disproportionately affected by climate change because of their level of underfunding, particularly around infrastructure and maybe the reliance on community facilities. But how can we kind of challenge that are there examples that you know of that are trying to challenge the resilience and kind of how adapted, sports provision for uh, those sorts of groups in society? What kind of examples might there be out there?
Definitely a big question, isn't it? And definitely something that I think everybody is considering, especially on our side at Pledgeball. You know, we've always been aware that climate change disproportionately affects women more than it does men when it comes to sport, particularly because when things go bad, resources tend to be directed towards men's sport, particularly in like professional spaces. And from anecdote stories across like the football network that I have in football at a grassroots level, there are cases of women's pitches that were once used being given to the men's game. And so it exists and it's a challenge that needs to be addressed. And I think advocacy is really important for this. Having, like we said earlier, those trusted messengers, those key voices, delivering the insights and the facts and speaking up for people that do get overlooked. An example of where we've worked to address this at Pledgeball is we've done some work with the Subway Women's League Cup final for 2 years now, working with the WPLL. And we essentially wanted to empower the women attending these games with the right resources and behavior changes that they can implement in their everyday lives to be part of solving the problem as much as they are kind of a victim to the issue itself. And so what we found is when you give people the resources to go away and learn and implement them themselves, they do actually, lean towards that change. And so when we were at it was actually really lovely. When we were at the Subway Women's League Cup final the first year, we did some sort of like micro activations on site of the game. So we went around the stadium and we had loads of different kind of challenges that the football fans could come up to us and take part in to win like a vintage football shirt, for example. And it all centered around questioning around like emissions or how did you get here? Did you travel sustainably? Have you brought your like reusable water bottle? And the sentiment that we had when we were there was everybody was just like, thank you so much for speaking to this. Like it feels like a bit of a silent killer in the background and we're lost. We don't see many people speaking about it. So it's really nice to see people stepping into that space and owning the voice. So I would say like advocacy is very key. You need people to speak up for those that are being affected. Policy is obviously really important, making sure that the people that are speaking up are also connected to the people that can create that change. But I think we're all responsible for noticing an issue and contributing to the solution. And I think maybe at like a school level, when it comes to PE teachers, is just being aware and conscious that that imbalance might exist and then consciously looking for ways to kind of reshift it a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Vicky, with the research. But for us, yeah, I think advocacy is really important.
I need to just pull on that advocacy and voice piece and starting that as young as we can. I work a lot with primary educators and primary children and giving young people the skills and voice. And there's a wonderful saying that says nothing for us without us. And if we're genuinely committed to addressing inequalities and young people's access, girls, women, young people with special educational learning difficulties and needs, that all the different demographics of young people who are caught with multiple levels of inequality, then we need to create safe spaces for young people to feel that they can share. But that safe space comes from creating an environment where voice and change is genuinely welcome. And genuinely listened to. So we have that superpower role model in the teacher, but it becomes mistrusted if we don't act on it. If we listen to voice and then do nothing with it,
Yeah.
we need to be really committed to seeing that through and starting giving those skills at a very young age to young people.
Yeah, I think I've seen. Well, so Ali, I was just thinking I've got friends actually who are in women's football teams, and they were on another pitch somewhere else, and that one was more likely to be flooded, and they had quite a lot of games that were put off this season, and it was because they weren't allowed to play on the main pitch because that was for the men's
Yeah.
team. And what I was also just thinking is there's some great examples of organisations who are really out there targeting and supporting, or creating space and holding space for these people. I've got a friend that works for She Runs, and there's a lot of these groups that are purposefully supporting and enabling those sorts of people to take part in these activities. Um, I think that's a really good point to sort of wrap up. There's one I wanted to just draw on something Ali said early on that maybe she said and we kind of passed it by a bit, but I think just that idea that this doesn't have to be about doom and gloom, that so much of this is about kind of naysaying of, oh, we can't do that, you shouldn't do that. But instead, we need to focus on the joy and the playfulness of this. And I think there's so much opportunity through physical education and sport to be able to draw on that and provide opportunities to really make connections with nature and remind ourselves of what's truly important. And I think those values have come through in this conversation. It's not just about the technical pieces of making sure that you swap out your bottle or whatever it might be, but actually there's something much deeper within our relationship with with the rest of the living world and with other humans, and that's the bit that we need to be focusing on. I was going to say thank you so much for taking part and sharing, and yeah, it might be a good opportunity to say goodbye. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. It's been really great, really interesting.